Claire's tone was just perfect. I think the takeaway here is 1 minute is really, really hard, but that's, I mean, the first couple of seconds is when you're either winning or losing that next, 30. So it's hard, and doing it on camera, knowing you're going to be on a show, like I give them
judged.
all props. Seriously. It's hard.
It's nerve-wracking. Yeah. But no, they did a great job, and I commend them for coming out, on this show. It does take a lot of courage to do it. Well, we are now officially in the debrief portion. I kind of want to ask you, how was your first experience getting pitched on the show today?
It was really fun. I always love to hear, like, I'm one of those people who will answer every call on my cell phone. So if you're watching this, yes, you can call me and pitch me. Because I love to hear the way that other people approach things, and I love to give feedback. And so this was really awesome. Coach in me is always like excited to kind of do this with people.
That's the best part of the show. We bring on like real coaches, people from leadership, and they love giving feedback and taking that call.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as you know, during this show, we like to take a step back and look at the early beginnings of, a lot of incredible SDR leaders like yourself, and learn from your lessons. So, looking back, you went from an SDR to closing deals in just 6 months, which is pretty impressive. And you were then an IC for a couple of years before making that jump into leadership.
Yeah.
If you were able to go back in time and give one piece of advice to your younger self during that transitional period, what would it be?
I think it would be to try new things. Like, don't be afraid to follow your gut, because I think one of the biggest hangups and let me just set some context a little bit. My first job was like a full-fledged telemarketer. Like, we were a third-party lead gen agency that was calling on campaigns for companies like Oracle, EMC, like following up on their trade show leads and things like that. So I'm talking hand dialing from a Cisco phone on the desk, 160 dials a day. It was hardcore. And I always, we would read off written scripts, and it was so hard. It wasn't me. And I always felt like if I had been able to deviate, that I could have had better conversations. And so, yeah, I think don't be afraid to try new things. Like, don't just take something that marketing writes for you. Not that marketing doesn't know. It's not the same. Experiment, iterate, analyze, and just always like absorbing as much as you can from people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a recurring theme that keeps coming up on the show, is that experimentation and enablement, empowerment is a big part of when you are transitioning into leadership from an IC role. And when we think about it, at the end of the day, I mean, the job of an SDR manager, SDR leader is literally to support and empower their reps, right? Not only to achieve quota, but to be able to, stand out and grow in their career, really. Now, you're actually part of some of the few who have successfully scaled and coached SDR organizations. So looking back at your time, specifically at Sound Commerce, you're able to grow the pipeline there to 3 million in just 6 months by implementing new sales and process playbooks. And I guess I was wondering, could you share with us or talk a little bit about what went into rebuilding the outbound messaging and strategies, specifically around cold calling?
Yeah, it was more of a building from scratch and not rebuilding. Okay. There was, I think, 1 or 2 people there that were just calling to recruit for events. And so there was no real like sales development function. Yeah. The first thing I do when I come into any like outbound role, whether it's leadership or not, is I'm going to try to get a handle on, what personas we're selling into. And I have like this persona pain chart. If anybody would like it, send me a message. I'm happy to share, but it really outlines, who we're reaching out to. What do they care about? How are they measured? How's success measured for them? What are their roadblocks? Who do they work most closely with? And from that, you can then build your messaging, because perfect example with Sam was that, he came in with messaging that wasn't VP specific. So being able to really tailor that. But I think the biggest problem is most outbound messaging is very product and feature focused. It's all about us, the vendor. Here's what we do. Here's what we've accomplished. Here's why we want to help you. And it's not enough about not just the problems that people are facing, but the cost of doing nothing about those problems. That has to be embedded in your messaging. And if it's not, nobody's going to care, because they're already getting the job done one way or another.
Yeah.
So that enablement piece, is huge. A lot of SDR leaders aren't given proper training. Like they're just kind of, oh, you're a top performer, I'm going to throw you into the leadership role. And they don't know how to enable a team. And because of that, a lot of reps struggle. So for me, building out that playbook with messaging and resources, that was the critical tool that we needed to be able to successfully start doing outbound outbound commerce.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you've done a phenomenal job at shining more light on the enablement piece and, even going as far as starting your own consulting service, the Ruby project, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe if you want, you could share a little bit about, what you guys are doing over there and how you're making enablement easier and better for organizations.
Yeah. Well, we called it the Ruby project because it is literally just that. It's a side project. I'm a firm believer in that staying in the trenches and like a full-time go-to-market job really helps me stay sharp, helps my brain stay engaged, keeps me excited to get up and go to work every day. But I still have that passion for coaching and enabling people. And so I thought with the Ruby project, I have a previous colleague, she's a fractional CMO, Shannon Yost. Her and I were like, gosh, we've got to close this gap for people who just don't get what they need from their companies and aren't crushing their numbers, and they're wondering why the heck they're failing. And so we started by just building an email course, and that took off. And I thought, well, let me teach my cold call framework, and that took off. And now we've just launched a newsletter that's going to be like weekly tips and tactics for being a better prospecting person. So it's kind of slowly snowballing, but yeah, we're on LinkedIn. We've got a newsletter, a ton of free information for you guys, and some courses that are obviously affordable for SDRs. Definitely check it out. But yeah, I just really wanted to kind of help. It took me so many years to figure out what works and to get frameworks that I could kind of repeat and meld along the way. And now that I have them, like I want to share them.
What better to do, right?
Yeah.
Share it with everybody. I don't think there's enough support out there, right? For enablement in general. So I think what you guys are doing is incredible. One big thing that actually comes to mind, and it typically comes up when I talk about enablement with other leaders, is transitioning the reps who have been doing things for so long in a certain way. It's kind of hard for them to transition and, get into the new way of things, right? Especially when you come in there and start enabling them with new talk tracks and new ways of thinking. This is a bit, veering off path here, but I kind of want to ask you, right? Is there any best practices there or any strong opinions you have in terms of making sure that those reps that have been doing things for so long can easily transition into this new way?
Well, here's the thing. If they've been doing it for so long and it's working, I'm all for it. Like the way that I like to manage and coach teams is like, if you want to try something new, go run an experiment. And if it works, bring it back and let's all do it. And never just, do what I say. And this is it. This is the end all be all. Like A/B test my stuff against yours and let's collaboratively come up with what the best approach is. If what you've been doing forever is not working and then you're not willing to change, well, then we've got a different issue, which is like, do you actually even want to be in this role? So I think, it's pretty clear when the current state is not producing, there've got to be changes made. And if people aren't willing to do that, then I don't really think it's the right job for them.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And it's probably harder for reps in larger organizations to
100%.
make those shifts. Yeah. I mean,
a lot of times you don't have the ability to, and it just breaks my heart.
Exactly. I feel like in startups it's probably easier because you kind of know you're going to be pivoting a lot there, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was an AE at IBM, and look, I didn't have an SDR, so I got to do all my own prospecting and teach my fellow AEs how to prospect. And that's when I realized, like, oh my gosh, I want to do this. I want to be a coach. So then I went into SDR leadership. And at Keysight, I have 40, 50,000 employees globally. So it's a pretty big org. I did have a decent amount of control. But then, when I jumped into the startup world and it was like, I get to build this, while I do it. And, I'll never go back. But yeah, the main thing is like test and iterate constantly. That's the key.
Yeah. And specifically on the topic of startups, I mean, you've now been part of 3 or 4, is it?
This is my fourth in a row. Yeah.
That's incredible. I want to ask you, though, what do you think are the most important steps to prioritize in the beginning when creating that outbound motion for a startup company that hasn't really explored or maybe hasn't seen the success with utilizing SDR teams?
You have to nail it before you scale it is my motto. A lot of founders are kind of like, there's this assumption that building a team and hiring reps is going to mean more pipeline. But until you've really figured out what works, what resonates, who exactly your buyer personas are within your ICP, what messaging they're going to respond to, what offers are appealing to them in that messaging, you don't want to replicate stuff that you're not sure about. So, hire an SDR leader who has done it before, but has also built from scratch. That can like test and measure. Someone like me, someone like you, Dom, that knows what they're doing enough to try and build a playbook, and then you go scale. I think, and if you're that one person who's starting that out, what I've always done is tiered my leads. Like I have people that I know have super high intent. There's something happening where I have a reason to reach out to them. Those are all manual. I do all that stuff very personalized. It's a very small bucket. My mid-tier is people who have some sort of signal where I might do like a first manual email and then maybe automate a couple of nurture things. And then you've got everybody else where it literally, and I know I'm going to lose some fans for this, but it is spray and pray, because if you're not sure what's working, you've got to A/B test en masse to figure that out. But you're not doing it with everybody. You're just doing it with those tier 3s. So prioritize your leads until you figure out what works.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one, honestly. Yeah. For any prospects that maybe aren't as relevant, or maybe they don't fit exactly into your ICP,
you just don't know.
Yeah,
you're gonna waste a lot of time if you
exactly. Yeah. But the big fish, I'll spend all day personalizing
100%.
an email or digging into researching their LinkedIn, their company themselves. I'll go on their Facebook page, right? Hopefully that's not too creepy. But
it's just kidding.
Yeah, but I think actually one of the big pieces when you are an SDR at an early stage startup, you actually don't get the competitive advantage of using the household name brand that a lot of other organizations tend to have, and that tend to lead to a lot more opportunities. So I guess, how do you think you can, as an SDR at a startup, right? How can you really gain that advantage without having to have that name attached to you that everybody knows and everybody loves?
Well, you can only control what you can control. So the last startup I was at, I think the 5th or 6th hire. Like we didn't even have any use cases. We had nothing. And so the key, I think, and remember, everybody's getting the job done, whether it's DIY, whether it's a competitor, whatever the case may be, they're already getting by without you.
Yeah.
So the important thing is to embed in your messaging, 1, why doing nothing is a horrible idea, and 2, what gaps you can address that competitors might have. If you're selling, let's say, a contact database up against the giants like ZoomInfo and Apollo, you might want to go to G2, figure out what people are saying that they don't like about those things, and just get that out in front when you call. Like, hey, I'm talking with other sales leaders who use ZoomInfo and Apollo. They hate that the mobile numbers are always wrong. That's something you're running into. You got to use that stuff to your advantage. So do your research, find an enemy, not the product, but the problem is the enemy, and talk about that.
Yeah, it's like that question that Sam asked earlier on our show today. How's your experience 1 out of 10?
Yeah.
That's awesome, right?
And
Get all that information.
It's a 5.
What can make it from a 5 to a 10? That would be at least my follow-up. And from there, you get all the ammo you need to go into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there was one more thing I actually want to chat about, is you talk a lot about data. And, as a first-time manager, using data and analytics, it can be quite daunting or even just scary. And, for these managers, they've gone from a position where they only need to account for themselves, really. Mm-hmm. And now they have to follow, analytical trends, keep track of key metrics and projections for an entire team, empower them, and so on. And you talk about it a lot, so I figured it'd be good to ask you, what does it really mean to be data-driven in the context of running an SDR org, and what are some ways that first-time managers can actually lean into data to be more effective?
I think, and I should probably modify this too, but I think data-informed is probably a better way to put it. There's a difference between looking at a dashboard and saying, oh, this person's not making enough dials, or, oh, this person missed their quota. It must be because, they didn't send as many emails or whatever. You really have to use the data to point you in the direction of where you need to do your coaching and development. If somebody's call to meeting conversion is lower than everybody else, you need to get in and listen to their calls. If somebody's connect rate is higher than the rest of the team, maybe dig into whether it's a geographical thing. Is it a vertical specific thing? Are they using a specific area code that's working better? So, using the data to point you in the direction that you need to go to figure out where the discrepancies are happening is super critical. And I think, if you want to keep morale high on the team and keep everybody working together and happy, don't ever use it as like singling people out. I did that early on, and nobody's perfect, right? And early on in leadership, it was like, hey, you're making half the dollars as everybody else. There could be a million reasons for that. And look for whoever's performing the best, figure out their process, and try to get everybody else doing the same thing.
Absolutely. Reverse engineer it, right? Yeah.
The biggest thing, like conversion rates, is really what you should be focused on, not KPIs. I mean, I've posted a few times about like the things you should keep an eye on. It's the cold call to meeting conversion, meeting to opportunity conversion. If that's low, maybe you've got a qualification problem. Those conversion rates are really critical.
Yeah. And using them like as a guide, really, like you mentioned earlier, it's not so much being data driven, it's more just being data informed and using those to then find the answer. Why is this happening?
Tells you there's a problem. Now you go figure out the rest.
Exactly. Well, Lydia, this has been an absolute blast and a great pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. For everyone watching, make sure to connect with Lydia on LinkedIn, stay up to date with all things SDR leadership, prospecting, cold calling. Lydia, before we close out, anything you want to say? Any shout outs you want to give?
Oh, I hear that I'm following after Chris Ciccone and Eric Iannello. So those are my buddies. I hope I did as good as them. But yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to answer any questions, chat, whatever you guys got for me.
Absolutely. Well, awesome. Thank you again for everybody watching, and we'll see you next time on Get Pitched. And that's a wrap.